The Valorian Empire had conquered 17 star systems. Their warships were massive, dark things that blocked out the light of suns. Their armies had crushed civilizations that had existed for millions of years. When species saw the Valorian fleet appear in their skies, they surrendered. They always surrendered. There was no other choice. Admiral Kethril stood on the bridge of his flagship, a vessel called the Eternal Dominion. He was tall, even by Valorian standards, standing nearly 9 feet, with scales that shifted color based on his mood. Right now, they were a confident shade of deep blue. This was going to be easy. It was always easy. The sensors had detected this planet 3 months ago. A small blue world orbiting an average yellow star. The inhabitants called it Earth. They had only recently developed basic space travel. Their technology was primitive. Their military capabilities were laughable. This would be the quickest conquest in Valorian history. "Open a channel," Kethril commanded. His voice was deep and carried the weight of absolute authority. "Let them see what they face." The transmission went out across all frequencies. Every screen on Earth, every phone, every computer. Every television displayed the same image. Admiral Kethril, on his bridge, surrounded by officers in ceremonial armor. With the stars visible through the massive windows behind him, on Earth, the response was immediate. World leaders gathered in emergency sessions. Military forces went to high alert. And in Geneva, at the hastily established First Contact Center, a team of 5 humans prepared to respond. Linda Morris was their leader. She was 53 years old. With gray streaks in her dark hair and lines around her eyes that came from decades of difficult negotiations, she had been a diplomat for 30 years. She had talked down terrorists, negotiated peace treaties, and once convinced 2 countries to stop a war over a border dispute that had lasted centuries. But she had never done anything like this. Beside her sat Danny Kowalski, young communications officer with messy brown hair and a nervous habit of tapping his fingers. He was 26 and had been chosen for this assignment because he was brilliant with languages and technology. He was also terrified, though he was trying very hard not to show it. Colonel Maria Santos represented the military. She was compact and strong, with short black hair and eyes that missed nothing. She had served in 3 wars and had the scars to prove it. She was not afraid of the aliens. She was not afraid of anything. But she was deeply concerned about what might happen next. Pete Harrison was the science advisor. He was tall and thin, with glasses that kept sliding down his nose. He had spent his entire career studying the possibility of extraterrestrial life. Now that it was here, he found himself oddly calm. This was what he had prepared for his whole life. The 5th member of the team was Grace Chen, psychologist specializing in crisis negotiation. She was quiet and observant, with a talent for reading people. She hoped that talent would extend to reading aliens. They watched Admiral Kethril's image appear on their screens. They listened as he spoke. "People of this world," the alien began. His voice was translated by some unknown technology, the words appearing in perfect English. "You stand before the Valorian Empire. We have subjugated species older than your sun. We have broken civilizations that spanned galaxies. You will submit, or you will be erased from existence." There was a long pause in the Geneva room. Linda Morris felt something strange building in her chest. It started small, like a tickle, and then it grew. She tried to stop it. She really did. But it was impossible. She snorted. It was a loud, undignified sound that echoed in the quiet room. Danny Kowalski made a noise that was half cough, half laugh. He bit his lips so hard it hurt. His shoulders were shaking. Colonel Santos had her hand pressed firmly over her mouth. Her eyes were watering. Pete Harrison was trembling. At first, it might have looked like fear, but his face was red and he was making small, squeaking sounds. Grace Chen was the most composed. But even she was struggling. A smile kept trying to break through her professional expression. On the screen, Admiral Kethril's scales flickered with confusion. This was not the reaction he had expected. He had seen fear. He had seen despair. He had seen beings fall to their knees and beg for mercy. but he had never seen this. "I'm sorry," Linda finally managed to say. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "I'm so sorry. That was unprofessional. It's just," she had to stop and take a breath. "Did you rehearse that? The whole older than your son bit? Because that was really good. Very dramatic." Kethrel's scales shifted to a deeper shade of purple. "You dare mock the Empire?" No, we're not mocking," Pete said quickly. He was still trying to control himself. "It's just that we've seen this before. Like literally hundreds of times. We have an entire genre dedicated to this exact scenario."
"Which genre?"
Kithro repeated. The word seemed to confuse him. Danny pulled out his tablet. His hands were shaking slightly, but his voice was steady. "Independence Day, War of the Worlds, Battleship, Battle Los Angeles, Edge of Tomorrow. Oh, and the really campy ones from the 50s. Those are classics. The Day the Earth Stood Still. Invasion of the Body Snatchers." "We don't understand," Kethrel said slowly. His scales were now a mix of purple and orange, indicating both confusion and the beginnings of anger. Linda leaned forward. Her expression had settled into something more serious, though there was still a hint of amusement in her eyes. "Admiral, we've been imagining alien invasions since before we had electricity. We've written books about it. We've made movies. We've created video games. We've spent over a century working out every possible scenario of how this conversation might go and how we might respond." She paused, letting that sink in. "We've imagined aliens that want to eat us. Aliens that want to breed with us. Aliens that want to harvest our water, or our air, or our minerals. We've imagined aliens that look like insects, like reptiles, like blobs of slime. We've imagined them coming in peace and coming in war. We've imagined winning against them and losing to them." Kethrel was silent. Around him, his officers exchanged uncertain glances. Linda smiled. It was not a friendly smile. It was the smile of someone who had faced difficult situations before and had always found a way through. "You're not our first nightmare, Admiral. You're just the first one that showed up in person." On the bridge of the Eternal Dominion, Admiral Kethrel felt something he had not felt in over 100 years of conquest. He felt uncertain. This small, fragile species on their tiny blue planet should have been terrified. They should have been begging for their lives. Instead, they were laughing at him. He closed the channel without another word. He needed time to think. He needed to understand what kind of species he was dealing with. Behind him, one of his officers spoke quietly. "Admiral, what do we do now?" Kethrel stared at the image of Earth on his main screen. Such a small world. Such a strange species. "We wait," he said finally, "and we learn there is something different about these creatures. Something we have never encountered before." He did not know it yet, but he was right. Humanity was different, and that difference would change everything. 3 days passed after the first transmission. The Valorian fleet remained in orbit, silent and waiting. On Earth, the world held its breath. People went to work, ate their meals, and put their children to bed. But there was a tension in the air that would not go away. Everyone was waiting for something to happen. Admiral Kethrel spent those 3 days reviewing everything his sensors could tell him about humanity. He watched their television broadcasts. He monitored their radio signals. He studied their internet, that strange network of information that connected almost every human on the planet. And the more he learned, the more confused he became. They were a violent species. That much was clear. Their history was filled with wars, with cruelty, with terrible acts of destruction. They had killed millions of their own kind over differences in belief, in skin color, in the lines they drew on their maps. By Valorian standards, they should have been perfect subjects for conquest. A divided species was an easy species to control, but there was something else, something that did not fit. They also created beautiful things, music that made his hearts ache in ways he did not understand. Art that captured light and emotion in forms he had never seen. Stories of love and sacrifice and hope. They were capable of incredible cruelty, yes, but also incredible kindness. They rushed into burning buildings to save strangers. They traveled across oceans to help people they had never met. They gave their lives for ideas. Kethril did not understand them. And what he did not understand, he could not easily conquer. On the fourth day, he made a decision. He would send a delegation to the surface. He would meet these strange creatures face to face. He would learn their weaknesses. The shuttle landed in Geneva in the early morning. 6 Valorian officers stepped out onto the concrete, their ceremonial armor gleaming in the pale sunlight. They towered over the human welcoming committee, each standing nearly 8 feet tall. Their scales shifted colors as they took in their surroundings, flickering between curiosity and disdain. Secretary General Carlos Menendez stepped forward to greet them. He was a calm man in his 60s, with silver hair and a gentle face that hid a sharp mind. He had led the United Nations through 3 major crises. This was simply the latest. T1. Welcome to Earth, he said, extending his hand. When the Valorians stared at it in confusion, he smoothly changed the gesture into a small bow. We've prepared a conference room for our discussions. There's coffee if you'd like to try it. Also, some pastries. The lead Valorian was a diplomat named Shalvera. She was smaller than the others, though still much larger than any human. Her scales were a controlled shade of gray, indicating careful neutrality. She studied Carlos with 4 unblinking eyes. You offer us refreshments? She asked. Her voice was sharp and clear. We have threatened your entire species with extinction. Well, yes, Carlos said, beginning to walk toward the building, but you haven't actually done anything yet. And we find that negotiations go better when everyone's had something to eat. It's a human thing. The Valorians followed, uncertain but curious. They passed through hallways filled with humans who stared at them with a mixture of fear and fascination. Some of the younger staff members were taking pictures with their phones. One child, the daughter of a delegate, waved at them from behind her mother's legs. The conference room was simple. A long wooden table, comfortable chairs, large windows that showed the city beyond. The pastries were arranged on a silver tray, and the smell of fresh coffee filled the air. The humans took their seats on one side of the table. The Valorians took the other. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Shalvera began. The Empire's terms are simple, she stated. Her voice carried the weight of absolute certainty. Total surrender. Your military forces will be disbanded. Your governments will answer to imperial governors. Your resources will be allocated according to our needs. In exchange, we will permit your species to continue existing in a diminished capacity. The humans listened politely. When Shalvera finished, they exchanged glances. Some of them were clearly trying not to smile. General Amy Patterson spoke first. She was the head of Earth's Combined Defense Council, a woman in her 50s with short gray hair and a face that showed no fear. She had fought in wars. She had lost friends. She had made hard decisions that kept her awake at night. But she had never surrendered, and she was not going to start now. Right? She said calmly. So here's the thing. We're going to have to decline. Shalvera's scales flickered orange with anger. Decline? You have no fleet. No interstellar capabilities. Your weapons are primitive. You cannot decline. And yet Amy said, spreading her hands, we are. Then you choose death. Maybe Amy acknowledged. She leaned forward, her eyes locked on Shalvera's. But here's what I want you to understand. We've been fighting each other for our entire existence as a species. We've developed weapons specifically designed to kill humans. Creatures exactly like ourselves, with the same weaknesses, the same biology, and we got really, really good at it. She pulled out a tablet and slid it across the table. That's a summary of our military history. Just the highlights. 2 world wars. Hundreds of regional conflicts. The development of nuclear weapons. Biological agents. Chemical warfare. We've poisoned our own air and water just to gain tactical advantages over each other. Shalvera picked up the tablet. She began to scroll through the information. Her scales slowly shifted from orange to a pale, sickly yellow. Around her, the other Valorian officers leaned in to look. Their expressions changed as they read. Your species, Shalvera said slowly, deliberately developed a weapon capable of rendering your entire planet uninhabitable. Several, actually, Amy replied. We've got enough nuclear warheads to do it multiple times over. And those are just the ones we've admitted to publicly. Why would you create such things? Because we might need them someday. Amy's voice was quiet but firm. And now, apparently we do. The room was very quiet. Outside the windows, the city continued its daily life. Cars moved through the streets. People walked on sidewalks. A bird landed on the window ledge and pecked at something invisible. Linda Marie spoke next. Her voice was gentle, almost kind. We're not trying to threaten you, Shalvera. We're trying to explain who we are. We're a species that has been preparing for this moment in one way or another for thousands of years. We've imagined every possible scenario. We've made plans. We've built weapons. And more importantly, we've learned how to fight against impossible odds. She paused, choosing her words carefully. You might destroy us. That's certainly possible. But it won't be easy. It won't be quick. And it will cost you more than you can imagine. We will fight in our cities. We will fight in our mountains. We will fight in our oceans and our deserts and our forests. We will use every weapon we have, including the ones that would destroy our own world. Because that's who we are. That's what it means to be human. Shalvera set down the tablet. Her scales had settled into a troubled shade of gray. She looked at the humans across the table, these small, fragile creatures who should have been kneeling in terror. Instead, they sat calmly, drinking their coffee, offering her pastries. We need to consult with the Admiral, she said finally. Carlos nodded. Of course. Take all the time you need. In the meantime, would anyone like to try the croissants? They're fresh from this morning. One of the younger Valorian officers reached for a pastry. He took a bite. His scales shifted to a surprised shade of pink. This is good, he admitted. Carlos smiled. We have a few things worth saving, Admiral. More than a few, actually. Perhaps you'd like to see them before you make any final decisions? Alvera said nothing. But she did not say no. The Valorians did not attack. Instead, Admiral Cathrell made an unusual request. He wanted to study humanity. He wanted to understand this strange species before making any final decisions about their fate. Earth's leaders agreed. They had nothing to lose and everything to gain. If the aliens wanted to learn about humanity, then humanity would show them everything. The good, the bad, the beautiful, the ugly. All of it. For 3 months, Valorian observers were permitted to live among humans. They were given translators and guides. They were taken to museums and concert halls. They watched sporting events and attended festivals. They ate human food, listened to human music, and tried to understand human behavior. The reports they sent back to the fleet were increasingly confused. One observer, stationed in New York City, wrote about his experience in Times Square. The lights never stop, he reported. The noise never stops. The humans move through this chaos as if it were normal. They bump into each other, apologize, and keep walking. They seem to draw energy from this constant stimulation. I find it exhausting, but they find it exciting. I do not understand them. Another observer assigned to a small town in Kansas had a very different experience. The humans here are quiet, she wrote. They know each other's names. They help each other without being asked. When a storm destroyed several homes, the entire community came together to rebuild. They did not wait for their government. They simply did what needed to be done. There is a strength here that is not about weapons or technology. It is about connection. A third observer attended a football game in Texas. His report was short but troubled. They scream at each other for hours over which group of men can carry a ball across a line. They paint their faces. They wear strange costumes. And when the game is over, they embrace each other, winners and losers alike, and share food and drink. Their aggression and their affection exist side by side. I cannot separate the two. But the most confused report came from an observer named Trelsa, who was stationed in Tokyo. She had been sent to study human technology, but she had stumbled into something else entirely. I attended an event called a comic convention, she wrote. The humans dress as fictional characters. Many of these characters are warriors who fight against alien invasions. They have been imagining us for decades. They have created stories where they defeat us, where they befriend us, where they fall in love with us. They have explored every possible outcome of this moment in their imaginations. She paused in her report, struggling to find the right words. I think this is fun. The end of their world is entertainment to them. They laugh about it. They make jokes. They create art showing humans standing victorious over alien corpses. And they do this not out of arrogance, but out of something else. Something I can only describe as hope. They believe, truly believe, that they can survive anything. And this belief seems to make it true. On Earth, meanwhile, the humans were also learning about the Valorians. Sophie Williams was a xenanthropologist, which meant she studied alien cultures. Before this, her job had been entirely theoretical. Now, it was very, very real. She spent her days interviewing Valorian observers, attending their cultural events, and trying to understand how their society worked. What she found made her sad. The Valorians had been conquering for over 10,000 years. They had absorbed hundreds of species into their empire. But somewhere along the way, they had lost something important. They had forgotten how to create. They had forgotten how to dream. Their art is all about past victories, Sophie explained in a briefing to world leaders. Her voice was thoughtful, almost gentle. They have paintings and sculptures celebrating their conquests. They have songs about their military heroes. But they don't have anything new. They don't imagine futures. They only remember pasts. What about their entertainment? Asked President Eduardo Vega. He was a serious man, but he was also curious. He wanted to understand these beings who had threatened his world. That's the saddest part, Sophie said. They don't have comedies. No jokes about their leaders. No satire. No absurdist humor. They don't understand why we laugh at ourselves. The concept of self-deprecation is completely foreign to them. The room was quiet as this sank in. They've never made fun of themselves. Asked Prime Minister Yuki Tanaka. She seemed genuinely surprised. Ever. Never. To them, that would be weakness. They don't understand that admitting our flaws makes us stronger. They don't understand that laughing at ourselves is a way of accepting ourselves. Sophie pulled up a chart on the screen behind her. It showed various metrics of cultural production. Music, art, literature, film, games. Humanity's numbers were enormous. The Valorians' numbers were tiny in comparison. We create more in a single year than they have created in the last century, Sophie said, and most of what we create is joyful. It's about love and hope and possibility. Their culture is about fear and control and dominance. So we're more creative, Eduardo said slowly. But they have the ships. They have the weapons. What good does creativity do against that? Sophie smiled. It was a small, knowing smile. Creativity's how we survive, she said. For hundreds of thousands of years, we were small and weak. We couldn't outrun predators. We couldn't outfight them. So we had to outthink them. We made tools. We made traps. We made plans. And when the world tried to kill us, we imagined ways to survive. She pointed at the screen. That's what the Valorians don't understand. Our creativity isn't a luxury. It's our greatest weapon. We can imagine solutions to problems that don't exist yet. We can see possibilities that they can't even conceive of. And right now, millions of humans are imagining ways to defeat them. Scientists, engineers, artists, writers, children, everyone is thinking about this. Everyone is dreaming. She looked around the room at the assembled leaders. They've never faced an enemy like us. They faced species that were stronger, species that were more advanced. But they've never faced a species that could imagine its way out of anything, and I don't think they know what to do about it. Admiral Cathrell was thinking the same thing. He stood on the bridge of his flagship, reading the latest reports from the surface. Each one made him more uncertain. These humans were not like any species he had encountered before. They were weak, yes. They were primitive. But there was something in them that he could not name. Something that made him hesitate. Admiral, one of his officers said carefully. "The High Council is requesting a status update. They want to know when we will proceed with the conquest." Kethril did not answer immediately. He stared at the blue planet on his screen, this small world filled with strange, laughing creatures. "Tell them," he said finally, "that I am still gathering intelligence. Tell them that this species requires careful study before we act." "But Admiral, the Council is growing impatient." "Let them," Kethril said. His voice was quiet but firm. "I will not move against this world until I understand it, and I do not understand it yet." He did not know it then, but he was beginning to learn. He was beginning to see that there were some things more powerful than weapons and ships. Things like imagination. Things like hope. Things like the ability to laugh in the face of death and mean it. Humanity was teaching him, and for the first time in his long life, Admiral Kethril was willing to learn. 6 months had passed since the Valorian fleet first appeared in Earth's skies. 6 months of waiting. 6 months of uncertainty. 6 months of humans going about their daily lives while alien warships hung above their heads like silent promises of destruction. Admiral Kethril had spent those months studying. He had read thousands of reports from his observers on the surface. He had watched countless hours of human broadcasts. He had tried to understand this strange species that laughed at death and created beauty from chaos. And now, finally, he had reached a decision. The quantum link to the Imperial Council crackled to life. 12 holographic figures appeared on the bridge of the Eternal Dominion, the highest leaders of the Valorian Empire. They sat in their ornate chairs, their scales shifting with impatience. High Counselor Methrin spoke first. He was ancient, over 2,000 years old, and his scales had faded to a dull gray. But his eyes were still sharp, still hungry. "Admiral Kethril," he said, "you have been in orbit around this primitive world for 6 months. The Empire demands an explanation. When will you complete the conquest?" Kethril stood straight and tall. He had rehearsed this moment in his mind 100 times. He knew what he was about to say would shock them. He said it anyway. "We cannot conquer this world," he stated. "Not without losses that would cripple the Empire for generations." The Council erupted. Scales flashed red and orange with anger. Voices overlapped in outrage. "Possible," Methrin snarled. "You command the largest fleet in this sector. They have no ships. They have no weapons capable of reaching us. Explain yourself." Kethril waited for the noise to die down. When he spoke again, his voice was calm and steady. "They don't need ships," he said. "They will fight us in their cities. They will fight us in their mountains. They will fight us in their oceans. They will use every weapon they have, including the ones that would destroy their own planet. And they will keep fighting until either we are gone or they are. Then we destroy them from orbit," one of the counselors said. "Burn their cities. Poison their air. It has worked before," Ukid Kethril admitted. "But consider this. Their population is 8 billion. They are spread across every landmass. They live underground, underwater, even in orbit around their world. To ensure complete elimination, we would need to render the planet completely uninhabitable. The resource cost would be enormous, and we would gain nothing from a dead world." He paused, letting this sink in. "I've run the calculations myself. A full conquest, assuming total human resistance, would cost us approximately 40% of our fleet. The occupation that followed would require a permanent military presence of at least 2 million soldiers. And even then, we would face constant rebellion. They would never stop fighting. Never. That is who they are." Mithron's scales had shifted from angry red to thoughtful gray. "You speak as if you admire them." "I have learned to respect them," Kethril said carefully. "There is a difference. Respect?" Another counselor spoke, her voice dripping with contempt. "They are primitive. They still burn carbon for energy. They still use chemical rockets to reach their own moon. What could they possibly have that deserves our respect?" Kethril had been waiting for this question. "Akria," he said. "Not just weapons, but art, music, stories. They imagine futures they have never seen and work to make them real. Every other species we have conquered was focused on survival, on the present. Humans live in their imaginations. They dream of possibilities that do not yet exist. He brought up a display on the main screen. It showed human achievements, their music, their literature, their scientific discoveries, their acts of kindness and sacrifice. In the past 6 months, I have watched them create more art than our empire has produced in a century. I have watched them risk their lives to save strangers. I have watched them face the prospect of extinction and respond with humor, with defiance, with hope. They are not just surviving, they are thriving. Even now, even with our fleet above their heads, they are laughing and loving and dreaming. He turned to face the council directly. If we destroy them, we destroy something the galaxy may never see again. A species that laughs at death. A species that finds meaning in chaos. A species that creates beauty in the midst of destruction. We would be removing something irreplaceable from the universe. The council was silent. This was not what they had expected. They had expected reports of weakness, of fear, of easy victory. Instead, they were hearing something that sounded almost like admiration. Methrin leaned forward. His ancient eyes studied Cathrell with new interest. "What do you propose?" he asked quietly. Cathrell took a deep breath. This was the moment that would define his legacy. This was the moment that would change everything. "Alliance," he said. The word hung in the air like a thunderclap. No one spoke. The council members stared at him as if he had grown a second head. "Alliance?" Methrin repeated. "With primitives? With creatures who cannot even leave their own star system? With a species that has something we have lost?" Cathrell said firmly. "For 10,000 years, we have conquered. We have absorbed, we have dominated. But when was the last time we created something new? When was the last time we imagined something that had never existed before? When was the last time we laughed?" He gestured at the display, which now showed Valorian cultural production. It was sparse. Military marches. Victory monuments. Records of conquest. "We have become stagnant," Cathrell continued. "We have forgotten what it means to dream." But they have not. They dream constantly. They imagine worlds we cannot conceive. They create beauty we do not know how to make. They could teach us if we let them. "And what would we offer in return?" another counselor asked. The contempt had faded from her voice, replaced by something that might have been curiosity. Technology, protection, access to the stars. They want to explore the universe. They have wanted it for centuries. We can give that. And in return, they can remind us what we used to be, what we could become again. Methrin sat back in his chair. His scales had shifted to a deep, thoughtful blue. The other counselors exchanged glances, uncertain and confused. "This is unprecedented," Methrin said finally. "In 10,000 years, the Empire has never allied with a species. We have only conquered." "Then perhaps it is time for something new," Cathrell replied. "Perhaps it is time for the Empire to grow, not by taking, but by learning. Perhaps it is time for us to be more than we have been." The silence stretched on. Seconds became minutes. The fate of two civilizations hung in the balance. Finally, Methrin spoke. "We will consider your proposal," he said. His voice was neutral, giving nothing away. "You will maintain your position and await further instructions. Do not act without authorization." The link closed. The holographic figures vanished. Cathrell stood alone on his bridge, staring at the blue planet below. He had done everything he could. Now he could only wait. On Earth, the humans went about their lives. They worked and played and laughed and loved. They did not know that their fate was being decided in a council chamber light years away. They did not know that an alien admiral had just argued for their survival. But perhaps in some way, they did know. Perhaps that was why they kept laughing. Perhaps that was why they refused to despair. Because somewhere in their hearts, they believed they would survive. They always had. And so far, they had always been right. The message came 3 weeks after Admiral Cathrell's proposal to the council. It was short and simple. Proposal approved. Proceed with alliance negotiations. Kethrel read the message twice to make sure he understood it correctly. Then he read it a third time. In 10,000 years of Valorian history, nothing like this had ever happened. The Empire did not make alliances. The Empire conquered. That was simply how things were done. Until now, the treaty negotiations took another 3 months. There were arguments and disagreements. There were moments when everything almost fell apart. The humans wanted guarantees of their independence. The Valorians wanted access to human creativity. Both sides were suspicious. Both sides were afraid of being taken advantage of, but somehow they kept talking. And slowly, carefully, they built something new. The signing ceremony took place exactly 1 year after first contact. It was held in Geneva, in a building that had been specially constructed for this moment. The architecture was a blend of human and Valorian styles. Soaring arches and warm wood and views of the mountains beyond. Representatives from every nation on Earth were present. The Secretary-General sat at the center of the human delegation, surrounded by presidents and prime ministers and kings. Across from them sat Admiral Kethrel and the highest officials of the Valorian Empire. High Counselor Methron himself had made the journey, something he had not done in over 500 years. The cameras broadcast the event to every screen on Earth and every ship in the Valorian fleet. Billions of beings watched as history was made. Ambassador Linda Morris spoke first. She stood at the podium, her gray hair pulled back, her eyes bright with emotion. She had spent her entire career working toward moments like this. She had never imagined one this big. 1 year ago, she began, we looked up and saw ships in our sky. We did not know if we would survive. We did not know if our children would have a future. All we knew was that we were not alone in the universe, and that the universe might not be friendly. She paused, looking out at the assembled crowd. Today, we signed a treaty of alliance between Earth and the Valorian Empire. This is not the end we expected. It is not the future we imagined in our stories. It is something stranger and more wonderful than anything we dreamed. She smiled, and there was a hint of that same humor that had startled Kethrel on their first meeting. We expected conquerors. We found partners. We expected an ending. We found a beginning. Admiral Kethrel spoke next. His voice was deep and resonant, translated into 100 languages simultaneously. He stood tall, his scales shimmering with colors that the humans had learned to recognize as pride and hope. The Valorian Empire has learned something from humanity, he said. We have learned that true strength is not measured in conquests or in fear. It is measured in resilience, in creativity, in the courage to face the unknown with hope instead of despair. He looked at the human delegation, at these small beings who had laughed at his threats and refused to surrender. You taught us to remember what we had forgotten. You reminded us that there is more to existence than dominance and control. There is joy. There is laughter. There is the endless, beautiful act of creation. He bowed his head slightly, a gesture of respect that his species had not shown to another for millennia. Thank you. The treaty was signed with pens that had been specially made for the occasion, human signatures and flowing script. Valorian signatures and angular marks, 2 very different ways of writing, 2 very different species, one future. Afterward, there was a reception. Humans and Valorians mingled in the Great Hall, trying to talk to each other, trying to understand each other. It was awkward and strange and often confusing, but it was also hopeful. Danny Kowalski, the young communications officer who had been present at the very first contact, found himself standing near a window with Trelsa. The Valorian observer who had been so confused by the comic convention, they watched the crowd together in comfortable silence. I have a question, Trelsa said eventually. Sure, Danny replied. When we first appeared in your system, when we threatened your entire species with extinction, you laughed. I still don't understand why. Danny thought about it for a moment. Outside the window, the sun was setting over the mountains. The sky was painted in shades of orange and pink. It was beautiful, because it was absurd, he said finally. The whole situation, here we were, this little species on a tiny planet being threatened by an empire that had conquered star systems. By every logical measure, we should have been terrified. We should have given up immediately, but you didn't. No, because logic isn't the only thing that drives us. We have this thing called hope. And humor, which is kind of like hope's weird cousin. When everything is terrible and nothing makes sense, sometimes the only sane response is to laugh. And if we had attacked, if we had destroyed your world, Danny shrugged, then we would have died laughing, which, honestly, isn't the worst way to go. He turned to look at her directly. This towering alien who had come to destroy his world and stayed to learn from it. The point is, we never stopped believing we could survive. Even when the odds were impossible, even when logic said we had no chance, we believed anyway. And here we are. Across the room, Linda Morris was deep in conversation with Admiral Cathrell. They had become unlikely friends over the past year, meeting regularly to discuss the progress of negotiations. Now they stood together, watching the two species learn to coexist. Now Linda said, "When I was a little girl, I used to look up at the stars and wonder if anyone was out there. I spent my whole career hoping to find out." "And now you know," Cathrell replied. "We were out there, waiting to conquer us." "Yes, and instead, we found something we did not know we were looking for." Linda raised an eyebrow. "Which was?" Cathrell's scales shifted to a warm shade of gold. It was an expression of genuine affection, something his species rarely showed. Partners. True partners. A species that could match us not in strength, but in spirit. A species that could show us that there is more to existence than dominance and fear. Linda smiled. "Well, Admiral, if there's one thing humans are good at, it's being unexpected." "Indeed," Cathrell agreed. "Indeed you are." High Counselor Methrin approached them. He moved slowly, his ancient body showing its age, but his eyes were bright with something that might have been wonder. "I have lived for over 2,000 years," he said quietly. "I have seen the rise and fall of empires. I have watched species be born and die, but I have never seen anything like this." He gestured at the room, at humans and Valorians laughing together, sharing food and stories. "You were right, Cathrell. This species is different. They are small and weak and primitive, but there is something in them that burns, something that refuses to die, something that makes them impossible to defeat." He looked at Linda, his 4 eyes studying her with ancient wisdom. "Call it hope? We had forgotten that such a thing existed." "You have reminded us." Linda took his hand. It was rough and scaled, much larger than hers. "But it was warm." "We are all learning," she said gently. "That is what today means. Not an ending. A beginning. A chance to discover what we can become together." Outside the great hall, night had fallen. The stars were bright and clear, visible through the tall windows. Among them, the lights of the Valorian fleet could be seen. It's no longer a threat, but a promise. The universe was vast and old, filled with wonders and terrors beyond counting. But on this night, on this small blue world, 2 species had found something precious. They had found each other, and humanity, as it always did, met the moment with a smile. This was not the end of their story. It was only the beginning. There would be challenges ahead. There would be misunderstandings and conflicts. There would be moments when the alliance seemed ready to shatter, but there would also be triumphs.